In our last video, we finished up a discussion on creating some animated movie clip buttons. And if we hover over them, let's go ahead and test our movie by hitting Control-Enter. I'm opening up mcbutton03.fla. If we hover over each of these, the button animates out. When we move away, it animates back to where it was. And it's a really neat effect. And for what it is, I think it's absolutely perfect. However, what if you wanted your buttons to act a little bit differently? For example, notice that if we hover over the home button and then move away from it before this animation is finished, it automatically jumps out to the end and animates back. In other words, it doesn't finish this expansion animation. Instead, when we move away from it, it automatically jumps to its full size and then animates back. And the reason for that is whenever we move our mouse cursor away from the button, we're triggering the roll out event. And if we double click to go into one of our buttons, the roll out event starts with our button at its full width. So even if, let's say that we hover over our button, so we start this over animation here, let's say that we get about 2 frames into it before we move away from it. Well, instead of just going back to where it started from, it's going to suddenly jump out to frame 20 to where it's at its full size and it's going to animate back. Well, what if we wanted the kind of functionality where whenever we move our mouse cursor away from our button, no matter what point it's at in this animation, it's just going to go back and animate back to its original size? Well, unfortunately, we can't really do that easily with timeline animations like this. So we're going to jump into ActionScript and create our animations using ActionScript. So we're no longer going to need this up, over, and out state. All we're going to need is a button. So let's go back to scene 1. And I'm just going to click on our home button and hit Control-C to copy it. And then we're just going to create a new file, File New. It will be an ActionScript 3 file. Click on OK. And then we'll hit Control-V to paste it. Now, inside this movie clip, if we double click on it, we still have our up, over, and out state. I'm going to delete everything. So we're going to highlight all of our frames except for frame 1 and hit Shift F5 to delete those frames. And since we're working with a 1-frame movie clip now, we no longer need our labels layer. We don't even need our actions layer, so let's delete both of those. And I'm going to go ahead and delete the hit state as well. And for our text, I'm going to click on the text and make sure down here that it's not selectable, because if it's selectable, that can sometimes interfere with the button. And we might need to put that hit state back later on, we'll see. But for now, let's lock that text layer, and we have everything like we need it, except for the background. What we're going to do is we're going to convert this background to a movie clip, and then using ActionScript, we're going to cause this movie clip to animate out or animate back whenever we roll over it or roll away from it. So let's select that movie clip, and let's actually go in here and notice we have this hit state. Let's delete that. And we have button BG. I'm going to go ahead and delete that as well because that's what we're going to turn this into. So all we have now is our home button movie clip. So we're going to click on that background, hit F8 to convert it to a symbol. It's going to be a movie clip symbol, and in this case, the registration point is absolutely important. If we want our animation to move out only to the right, we need to put the registration point in the upper left-hand corner. If we want it to move out from the center so that it expands both ways, we'll put our registration point in the center. But here, we just want it to expand out to the right, so we're going to put the registration point in the upper left-hand corner, and we'll call this button BG. And it's going to be a movie clip. We'll click on OK, and now we need to give this movie clip an instance name because we're going to point to this movie clip in our ActionScript, and we're going to tell it to expand out or to animate back. So we'll select that. Go down to our properties panel and we'll type in button BG underscore MC. Okay, so let's go back to scene 1. We're back in the main timeline now, and everything else we're going to do is going to be in ActionScript. Just make sure that your home button has a instance name, home underscore MC. Then we'll rename this layer buttons, lock that layer, create a new layer, call that layer actions, lock that layer, and then click on frame 1 for your actions layer and open up your actions. Okay, so some of our code is going to be similar. We need to turn on button mode, so home underscore MC dot button mode equals true, semicolon to end your statement. And we're also going to have an event listener for rollover and rollout. So home_mc.add event listener. It's going to be a mouse event dot roll underscore over, all capital letters, comma, space. And when we roll over it, we're going to trigger a function that we're going to call button over. Okay. We're going to create our rollout event listener. So home_mc.add event listener, mouse event.rollout. We see it highlighted there in our code hint, so we can just hit enter, comma, space. And when we roll out or roll away from our button, we're going to call a function that we're going to call button out. Close your parentheses, semicolon to end your statement. Okay, so now let's create our functions. We'll create a function called button over. In the button over function, we need to put our event variable, so mouse event, close your parentheses there, and then void, since we're not going to return any values, and then we'll put our opening and our closing curly bracket. So what we want to do when we hover over our home button is we want to go into that home button, point to its background movie clip, and tell it to expand out to the right. And we're going to do that using the tween class. So before we can actually use the tween class, we need to import it. So we're going to go up here to line 1. We'll hit enter a couple times, and then we'll hit the up arrow key to go back to line 1. And we're going to import fl.transitions.tween with a capital T, like so. And when we use the tween class, we also need to import the easing classes. So import fl.transitions.easing.*, and that will import all of the easing classes, or all of the classes within that easing folder. So when we hover over our button, we want to create a tween. And our tween is going to animate our background movie clip out to a certain width. And so what we're going to do first is we're going to store our starting width. So let's go up here at the top and create a variable called start width, and this is going to be a number, so number with a capital N, and we're going to set this equal to whatever the width is of our background movie clip whenever we first load our movie. So we're going to point to home_mc dot, and then we're going to point to the movie clip, the background movie clip inside home_mc, which is called button bg_mc dot width, semicolon to end your statement. So we're basically looking at the current width of our button background, and this is going to be the width whenever we first load our file, and we're going to store that in a variable called start width. So then down here inside our button over function, we're going to create a new tween. So we can type in new tween. If we want, we can store this in a variable. So var, we'll call this over tween, tween equals a new tween. And then inside parentheses, we need to first type in the object that we're animating. The object that we're animating is going to be the button BG movie clip within whichever button triggered this event. So we're going to point to the home_mc button by typing e.current target, and then within that current target, we're going to point to button BG_mc. So e.current target dot button BG_mc. And that's going to be the object that we're animating. Now, just so we can see everything that's going on here, I'm going to delete this variable declaration, and we're just going to start with new tween. So we have the object being tweened, comma, space, and then we need the property of the object that we're tweening. Well, what we're going to tween is we're going to tween the width of the object. So we need to type width here within quotation marks. Okay, comma, space. And then we're going to type in the name of the easing function that we want to use. Well, let's use a strong ease out. So strong with a capital S. Strong is simply one of these easing classes that we imported on line 2. There's an easing class called strong. So strong.ease out, and we don't need any parentheses there, so if it puts one there for you, just delete it. Strong.ease out, comma, and then we need the starting and ending value of this tween. Well, the starting value is going to be this start width that we put up here. So start width, comma, and then the ending value, let's just put start width plus 20. So it's going to animate out so that it ends up 20 pixels wider than it started, comma, and then we need 2 more parameters here that determine how long this animation is going to take. Well, let's say we want it to take up 8 frames. So we're going to type 8, comma, and then do we want to use seconds? No, so we're going to type false. When we type false here, then this number will be in frames instead of seconds. So we have false, and then our closing parentheses and a semicolon to end our statement. Okay, so that was a lot of code there. Well, not too much code. It was just one extra line of code. But it was one really long line of code. But hopefully now when we hover over our button, we'll see that button background animate out, starting with its start width and ending with start width plus 20. So it should animate out so that it ends up 20 pixels wider than it started. So Control Enter to test, and we have an access of undefined property button out. What that means is we've created this event listener here pointing to a function called button out, but that button out function doesn't exist yet because we haven't created it yet. So for now, I'm just going to highlight this line of code, and we're going to apply a line comment. So Flash will ignore this line right here, and we'll just get rid of these comment tags in just a second. We'll Control Enter test again. There's our button. When we hover over it, sure enough, it animates out. And anytime we hover over it, it's going to jump back to its starting position and animate back out again. Okay, so now let's create the animation for moving back to its original location. So now we can get rid of these comments. We'll skip a couple lines at the end and create a new function called button out. And we'll put our event variable here, mouse event, close your parentheses, colon void, and then we'll put our opening and closing curly brackets there. And then I'm just going to copy this tween and we'll just make our changes to it. So let's highlight that entire line, Control C, and then we'll paste it here. So we're still going to animate the current target.button BG_MC. We're still animating the background of that button. We're still animating the width of that background. We're still going to use the same strong.easeOut. What's going to change here is going to be our start width and or the starting width of our movie clip and the ending width. Our starting width is not necessarily going to be start width plus 20, because if we move our mouse cursor away from the button before the first animation finishes, what we want to do is we want to just jump back to where we started. We want to animate back from that point to the start width. So what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of the start width plus 20. And in fact, let's just get rid of this as well. And we'll just type it all out. So after strong.easeOut, we need the starting width of this particular tween, which is going to be wherever it is at the moment. So we're going to point to e.current_target.button BG_MC.width. So the start of this tween is going to be whatever this width is right now. Okay, and then the ending value is going to be, we'll type a comma there, the ending value is going to be the value of that start width variable, so that we make sure we get it back to its original width. So let's test that and see if it works. Control Enter, we hover over it, we move away from it, and it animates back. Okay, let's see what happens if we move away from it before it finishes animating. You'll notice it doesn't jump all the way out to its full size, and this will be easier to see if we start off with something ridiculous. Let's change this to plus 100. That way, when we hover over it, it's going to extend out quite a bit. We move away, it goes back. Now let's hover over it and move away really quickly. You'll notice it doesn't get all the way out to that full width, like it did when we were just using the timeline to create these animations. So basically, whenever we move our mouse cursor away, it looks at its current width. It looks at the current width of that background, and it starts there when it animates back. So that's a much better way to do this. Now, the other way is fine too. It creates a really cool effect the other way. So don't discount the other way. The other way that we talked about in the last couple of videos still creates a really cool effect. This is just a different effect. It depends on what you want. So let's bring this back to plus 20. so that we're back to a realistic number. And there we go. In the next video, we'll go ahead and duplicate this a few times so that we're doing this to multiple buttons. But for now, let's save this file, save as. And we'll just call this ActionScript Button.fla. Or ActionScript Button 01.fla, since we're going to create another version in the next video. So we'll save that and we'll move on with the next video.